I am sorry for the delay. I am having technical difficulties. Um, Gunther, you can come back to Discord. It's absolutely fine. Thank you so much for being here. Trash Out King. Bye. It really wouldn't be a Monday without technical issues. Absolutely. Yeah, Gonzo, you are absolutely welcome to come back to Discord because I've got it sorted. So today's lecture is on Greta and why we are more inclined to be, how do I put it, sympathetic to when white people speak. And not really hear the voices of those who are marginalized. So today's lecture is called The Color of Compassion, Why the West Sees Greta and Forgets the Rest of Us. So what do you see? What is your perception when you see Greta Thunberg? Well, we pronounce her name Greta Thunberg, but in Swedish, her surname is pronounced Thunberg. Don't expect anybody to pronounce it Thunberg. Oh, okay, got you. So yeah, why do we relate to Greta? Why do we find that the message is so much clearer when Greta speaks? She's passionate. Greta, no one listened to her when she was right, and it's because of two things. Okay, you can go on. Absolutely talentless nugget. She's got the platform and she's white. So, with that in mind, let's go. There's a kind of silence that hums beneath the applause. It's the silence of names unspoken, bodies unseen, suffering deemed too foreign to touch. The silence that sits between a photograph of a white girl holding a sign for Gaza and the news of brown and black activists beaten, detained, or disappeared for the same cause. In the soft light of Stockholm, Greta Thunberg stands with her sign, Stand with Gaza. Cameras flash. Western headlines proclaim moral courage. Commentators sigh with relief. Finally, they say, somebody is speaking up. But someone has been speaking up. Black and brown folk the world over have been speaking up. Let's look at the flotilla, for example. Chris Smalls, vilified and surveilled for organizing Amazon workers in the US, spoke of exploitation, of empire built on the backs of the disposable. South African activists like Mandla Mandela, imprisoned by Israel for daring to sail towards Gaza with food and medicine, spoke of colonial continuity, apartheid unending, The world has simply refused to hear them. The medium is the message, absolutely. Marshall McLuhan, I, um, I think, is the person who coined that phrase. Because in the West, compassion has a color, compassion has a race. It comes back to the palatable revolutionary. Greta Thunberg is not the problem. Her activism is genuine, grounded, and often radical in its clarity. She used her platform to condemn Israel's slaughter in Gaza with a moral urgency that few Western public figures have dared to do. She has faced vitriol from not just Zionist lobbyists and politicians, but even the people who praised her for her climate advocacy, but cannot bear her anti colonial solidarity. But still, she is heard. Her photographs circulate through Western feeds not as a disruption, but as redemption. Yeah. The story of a young European woman standing against genocide allows the West to imagine itself as capable of change, still possessing a conscience. Chris Smalls never received such grace. When he held when he led the fight for labor rights at Amazon, a company that thrives on the same extractive logic that fuels global exploitation, he was demonized. Amazon executives called him not smart or articulate. Security followed him home. Security followed him everywhere. The media painted him as angry, reckless, and dangerous. The police were never far behind. Same resistance, different bodies, different responses. Now, if you were with me from the beginning of the year, you know that we read Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks. He wrote about this, Frantz Fanon, in the 1950s. They always consider unintelligent and emotional, like, absolutely. What Frantz Fanon said is how the colonial world works is a world divided in two, light and shadow, where only the colonizer's reflection counts as human. Greta's defiance is reflected back as a moral beauty. Remember, Greta Thunberg was demonized by Western powers, as she is now, because she's autistic, she's a kid, she's okay. And I'm going to say this and sound incredibly awful, but having lived in Sweden for the time that I did, um, Swedish culture in itself is culturally autistic, and Swedes agree with me. It's one of those cultures where nobody really knows how to act around each other. But people picked on her for being autistic. People picked on her for her neurodivergence. People didn't listen to her message because it wasn't convenient. But now people look to her as this bastion of anti colonial resistance. A nugget. I did not fare well with the people there. Um, but her defiance right now is seen as representing the West. Chris Smalls, however, is seen as a threat to order. Sukiswa, one of my friends who was arrested on the flotilla, she's rendered as invisible, her humanity locked away in silence. So it all comes down to how do we construct the architecture of empathy? And the architecture of empathy lies in how we view activism, how we view our moral stances in relation to what we know. And I'm going to try and find um, how many people do you know? How many people do you recognize from this flotilla? Because there were more than, I think there were like 40, more than 44, 45 boats that were sent on this flotilla. So it wasn't just Greta. Greta is kind of like the face of it. But there was there were a whole lot of social media activists. Greg being one of them. Greg from TikTok. Like, oh man, what's his surname? Just one. There were many social media. There was Samuel Leeson. There was oh man, there were so many. But all of these white social media activists, I mean, yeah, they started. I don't care when you were conscientized about Palestine. I just care that you were conscientized about Palestine. But they got a lot more airtime. They got a lot more attention. Oh yeah, my algorithm is completely fucked up. The names in the headlines that showed these people arrested in from the flotilla make me tea.
The plate needs to go down.
I know. Did you make me tea?
It did not. Keep
Okay.
the plate.
Love you. He's so sweet. You're so handsome, and I love you. But these activists from all over Europe, the activists from the US, they were the kind of figureheads. All of the articles saying that these activists were on these one of these 44 boats. There were very few non-white people named as in the headlines, like Greta Thunberg sets off to Gaza. What was it last time? It was that John guy, John Berger. I can't stand him. Um, these are people who have built their followings on everyday posting, on the privilege of their platform. Oh, I'm screenshotting that because that is brilliant. Movies/media as empathy machines. Yes, they manufacture empathy, they manufacture consent, they manufacture every single idea that we have as this is okay, this isn't. 450 activists, more than 450 activists were detained. Who do we hear about? We hear from Greta. One of the first things that was said to Greta when she was deported, when she actually got back to safety. Yes, Nina, they legitimize harmful stereotypes. We hear about these people who make content because they can. They have the time, they have the resources, they have the money, they have the backing, They have the privilege of looking like people who have money to back them. I don't have time to make daily content about Palestine, else I would. How many of us, especially people of the global majority, have time and energy? Yep, absolutely. White woman or girls go missing and it's front page. Yep, absolutely. And I can safely say that white creators who are aware of their privilege will be the first ones to admit that yes, they have the privilege of whiteness and they have the privilege of resources. And they build on that. So, yeah, you have people on these missions to Gaza. What about the people who have been on the ground in other countries pretty much their whole lives? People who have been on international no-fly lists and watch lists their whole lives because of the struggle. Why don't they get the recognition for it? Why don't they get the opportunity that white activists do? It's because the architecture of empathy is built around whiteness. Western empathy is an empire of mirrors. It recognizes only the familiar. It feels deeply for those whose suffering can be safely witnessed. It is not comfortable to look at a Palestinian journalist getting thinner and thinner as the months go by, as they are slowly being starved. You notice there are a lot more white people in these lives where they see a Zionist crashing out, fighting to defend their empire, and the sense of Schadenfreude it gives them when the anti-colonial, especially the anti-colonial white person, the decolonizing white person, is taking down every single one of their talking points than it is to show up in a live where there are 5 journalists on a panel, not just giving the news and risking their lives every single day to give that news, but they are on that panel trying very, very hard to make ends meet in a place where everything costs a lot. And Fatima, I'm going to let you up. Everybody, please do not gift me. Please give all the gifts you have to Fatima. Fatima is here from Syria. Fatima, I can barely hear you. So yeah, I'm going to mute you, Habibti. But please donate to Fatima. Fatima is in Syria. And in safely witnessing pain, in safely witnessing struggle, in safely witnessing what can be related to, we see people whose pain does not challenge the moral self-image of the observer. So somebody who's looking at Sirda's lives every single day, we try to get to a minimum gift goal on one of the journalists' account, Mohammed Gharib, and that goes towards feeding people and giving water to people in Al Mawasi. There's an average of 10 to 15 people in those lives every day. But the lives where people are fighting with Zionists, 250 people in those lives. people getting gifted left, right, and center. Listening to Dean and Parker, they get gifted hundreds of thousands of coins every single live. It's because they do not challenge the moral self image of the people watching. And when the person watching, thank you, my lovey, good night, you're handsome. We have a case where the person watching is so, thank you, is so wrapped up in their privilege and in their self image, they cannot, thank you so much, they cannot witness real pain. Not to say that anybody else's pain isn't real, of course, but they cannot witness pain that makes them uncomfortable. To see a white person starving to another white person is unacceptable. To see a black person starving to a white person is the status quo. Welcome, Say. I'm glad you're here. So there's a writer named Sarah Ahmed. She reminds us that empathy is not innocent. Empathy is never innocent because who do you empathize with? How do you empathize with certain people, and how does your empathy either fall away or kind of not click with this with certain people? She says that it's an effect that can reproduce hierarchy, a feeling that allows the privileged to maintain their self-concept as good people or humane people, even while benefiting from the structures of domination. I don't know if you remember when people were fleeing Ukraine, especially Kiev, in the hundreds of thousands. Some of the journalists made comments like, this is not a third world country. This is not somewhere in Africa or the Middle East. These, like, journalists said, these are our people. Our people. Our, mm? Thank you. I had a very South African reaction at that point where I was like, there's no translation for the word yin. Honestly, that was my only reaction. Exactly, Nina. Now this is an outrage. Not millions of people being slaughtered in the Sudan. Not millions of people being trafficked from the Congo in body bags. That was an outrage. People with backpacks and luggage getting onto trains to escape Kiev. That was an outrage. And so to support people like Greg and Greta is to feel safe. To support whiteness in an inherently decolonial space is to feel safe within that decolonial space. It's like feeling for the South African activists who were only released today. Well, they're not even released. They had their hearing today. And to feel for people like Chris Smalls, who was the only person on the Handala flotilla who was beaten up by the IDF. The rest of them were fairly unscathed. Chris Smalls, the only black person on the Handala flotilla, was beaten up. Yeehaw! That sounds awful. That was bad timing. Yeehaw! Please don't clip that. Please. No, it's not your fault. But to feel for people who don't look like the us, to feel for people who look like the them, is to confront the racialized violence that sustains Western comfort. And that's why when Nina said pull up a chair and get uncomfy, that's exactly why. Because when you have, when you sit in your comfort, when you look at people on this app willing to dance for food, the white savior industrial complex becomes very, very clear. And it really is an industrial complex. Make the monkeys dance. Dance puppet. Which is what white people have been doing to black people and brown people for centuries. You need to earn your keep where I get everything by default. So I've spoken about white woman tears a lot on this app. When white women cry, it's universal. When Greta cries, in activist circles in the West, it's that kind of universal. It's that same kind of universality that gives whiteness power. Thank you. It gives levity to the message because it is a white person saying it. But when black and brown activists bleed on the street, are beaten, are bloodied, are thrown into prison cells without food or water for days and days and days, there's hardly, well, there's nary a peep. And you see it on TikTok panels. When you see a white person who's decolonial or decolonizing, or like, you know, I among the left, I love my snow roaches. Y'all are wonderful. But when I see the image of the white girl standing Freza, getting 60, 70,000 coins on a panel where we can barely raise 1,000 for Hiba, for Fatima. It pains me because that comfort, that is the political message. It's messy, it's complicated to see a brown body suffering because the instinctual knee-jerk reaction is to look away and say, I cannot relate to this. I cannot bear to see it. The West does not like complicated pain. The West does not like to sit in its discomfort. It likes suffering to be photogenic. It likes its protests to be poetic. And ultimately, what it means is that it likes its justice to be non-threatening to the status quo that keeps whiteness in its current place. That's why the image of that white girl standing for Gaza travels so much faster than the image of an African medic in an Israeli prison. It's not that the latter is unknown. It's that it doesn't fit the emotional grammatical structure that defines whiteness, that makes whiteness what it is, that it enables whiteness to thrive. Yeah, like to feel one emotion at a time. That meteor shower was fantastic. W for Brie in the chat, please. Teju Cole coined the phrase that as I mentioned earlier, the white savior industrial complex. And when I read Teju Cole's analysis of it, I understood it as a system of empathy where it becomes performance of virtue rather than a commitment to justice. And I'm not saying that Greta's commitment to justice is not there. It absolutely is, especially if you heard her speech today. But it shows that it's the people watching her that I have an issue with. It's the people watching Greta and thinking, oh my God, you're such a hero. When she says, I'm not a hero, this is the bare fucking minimum, they're taken aback and offended. They're like, I just called you a hero. It is the people watching saying that the West does not stand with the oppressed, it stands over them, narrating their suffering, but in their own accent. Narrating their suffering in their own ways. Narrating the suffering so that the West can understand in a palatable fashion. And when someone who looks like Greta does the narrating, the story sells. Especially women of color in the global majority in the global South have been yelling about climate justice for decades. People in the global South have been screaming. We've been screaming our lungs out about how climate change is directly affecting the most marginalized people in the most impoverished countries, in the most underdeveloped countries in the world, in the most harmed societies in the world. But let one white girl sit outside her country's parliament every single Friday. I love Greta. I despise the people who only listen to her. And ultimately, it comes down to the disposability of Black and brown life. Because people like Chris Smalls, we're not supposed to win. People who look like us are supposed to be crushed, forgotten, replaced by another worker who's just too desperate to speak out. That's how capitalism sustains itself. It's through the disposability of bodies. And the most disposable bodies are Black and brown ones when it comes to capitalism. Because the system relies on the assumption that some lives are replaceable while others are not. That some pain is expected. The pain of the Sudanese is expected. The pain of the people in the Congo, oh, that's been a war zone my entire life. People in Flint, Michigan have not had water, clean water, for the past 10 years. They look like you. It relies on the assumption that some deaths do not demand mourning. That when we hear of yesterday, a flood ran through the central part of Nepal, sweeping away 60 people, all confirmed dead. 60 people. That's a lot of people. But they're just people in Nepal, right? An author named Christina Sharp wrote a book called on blackness and being. And she wrote that black life exists in the afterlife of slavery, in the afterlife of colonization, in a world that still treats black people's death as a background noise. Do you know that there was a third person who was lynched just the other day? His name was Javon Given. I saw the name Javon and my heart shattered because I thought it was our Javon from this app. And then it hit. I'm doing the same thing. That Javon matters just as much as our one does. Yes, Nugget. When I realized I was doing the same thing, mm, because that logic is alive in every single Western response to humanitarian crises, as they're called, to Gaza, to police killings, to migrant drownings in the Mediterranean that are enabled by Israel as well. When Israel bombs a school in Gaza, people in the West ask for context. And when South Africans who have been through apartheid, when another Mandela is on a watch list, and when they are detained, and when they are brutalized by the Israeli occupational forces, people in the West call it complicated. I blocked one person who came into the live just as it started. That's because they were putting that fucking toilet paper flag, spamming the toilet paper flag in Olive's live. When white people hold a flag or a sign or get their faces put on the front page, the West finds its soul again and says, we are doing something good. And this is not a coincidence. It's colonial continuity. The same logic that once measured human worth by proximity to whiteness. And so even the same fucking people who demonized Greta for being autistic are the ones saying she is perfect because she is whiter than the others. And so when you look at it, Fanon actually warned us that the colonial project is never allowed to be simply human. The suffering must be filtered through a white conscience to be recognized at all by saying, to the empire, our suffering is renewable energy. This is something that a Palestinian journalist once told me on a live. To the empire, our suffering is renewable energy. That was Hani Mahmoud. Is that Haya? Thank you. Give me a few minutes, Haya Habibti. And my response to him was, yeah, they extracted to recharge their moral batteries. Yeah. Fatima Habibti, salam alaikum. I'm bringing someone else up, okay? Haya is in Palestine. I know that it's a lot and we're all struggling, but let's do the solidarity things, shall we? Yeah. When Hani told me that, I was just like, yeah, that's exactly it. Our suffering is renewable energy. because when they see suffering and they can say, hey, I'm doing something, that's when the moral battery is recharged. And ultimately, thank you, Say, whiteness is humanity. Whiteness is what is considered humanity, because the West has never stopped believing that whiteness is the face of human. It sees its own reflection in people like Greta and calls it a conscience. It sees black and brown resistance and calls it chaos. You look at the marches through Europe. The only reason that those marches, every Friday, the marches for climate justice, were peaceful is because it was a bunch of white kids who were not met with the riot police. The very same people, very same age group, the very same schools. Those kids were marching in the street all over Europe for Black Lives Matter, and they were met with guns, riot gear, and tear gas because they were brown. While their classmates marched peacefully on Fridays without meeting a single bullet. And the difference is not the act itself. It is not the protest itself. Thank you, Habibti. It is about the bodies performing it. Bell Hooks wrote that the white imagination depends upon consuming black and brown pain, but only in ways that do not threaten white comfort. Yep. The black protester, the brown resistor, the Palestinian child, the Congolese child, the Sudanese mother. They are to be pitied and not paralleled. The white ally becomes the moral protagonist, not the people suffering. The white person becomes the moral protagonist because that is the bridge between barbarism and civilization. That white activist sits at kind of like the fulcrum between the barbarism of the people who need to be saved and the civilization of the people who need to be listening or who are doing the funding, whose moral conscience we're appealing to. So Greta can shout and be seen as pure, but let mm, let a black child raise her voice and she becomes unruly. Let one South African defy Israel. It becomes illegal. Even solidarity with whiteness is kind of like a guaranteed safety. Greta will not be brutalized by the police, but she would. This time, she wasn't just, catch and release. She was actually treated terribly this time around. But she won't be disappeared in her cell. There are two flotilla activists. Two of them, both Muslim, both of them from the Middle East, from other countries in the Middle East, who are missing off the records, have been being taken by Israel. Witnesses saw them being zip-tied and brutalized by the IDF. But the IDF says they have no record. They disappeared. Because Greta's defiance is legible to Western media. It is legible to the Western consciousness because it is embodied by somebody that the West already recognizes as human. Meanwhile, those Muslim activists, brown activists in general, we are forced to prove our innocence, prove our worthiness, prove our right to be mourned, and our legitimacy to resist. And one of the activists who was supposed to go on the flotilla, Joe Bluin, she told me the West sees itself in Greta. It sees humanity it wants to believe in, and it sees the rest of South Africa and feels shame. So it looks away. Because the West knows it didn't do enough for alleviating apartheid in South Africa. And that's when global South solidarity becomes a threat. So when our activists were detained by Israel for the humanitarian mission, they were not treated as aid workers, they were treated as enemies. Israel refused to release our activists up until today to have their first hearing. And the Western governments barely blinked. Hell, Israel fucking assassinated the prime minister of Yemen. Did you know that? The prime minister of Yemen was killed by Israel. Hi, Timo. Barely a blink. And this is the same West that lauded South Africa's liberation struggle. The same West that quotes Nelson Mandela while arming the apartheid state that he fought against, and is now detaining his grandson, the one that is now detaining his grandson. It's easy to love liberation once it has been domesticated. It's so easy. It's easy to think of liberation as this fuzzy thing that, you have all of these struggles with these banners like free, free Palestine. No, it's bloody. It's harder to face it when a liberation struggle looks at you and says, you're still a colonizer. And global South solidarity terrifies the West because it exposes that truth. It exposes the truth that the world's oppressed are not waiting for permission to resist anymore. Those kids who elected their interim leader on fucking Discord in Nepal, they're not waiting for permission to resist. They burnt down the palace. They burnt down a building that has been standing since the 1400s and said, it's a fucking building. We don't like it. They don't, and the West doesn't like the fact that we share a history of struggle older than Western democracy itself. The fact that one of the oldest universities in the world, the foundations are still there in India. It's called Nalanda University, and it was burnt down and broken down by the British and the Portuguese. Its foundation still stands, and they stole all the knowledge, and they extracted all of the genius from it. And still today, we can still say that our oldest universities precede Oxford by 800 years. And they are terrified. Because in colonial imagination, we are dangerous. What is so dangerous about a 4'10" little girl from the global south? Enough of a threat to turn me away at the border in 2022 and put a stamp of a banning order in my passport. Twice. They don't fear me. They fear what's in here. They fear the idea that they cannot kill. And our South African struggles that relate to the rest of the world, we're not forgotten because our story is not small. They are pushed aside because it is too large and too connected to the histories that the West prefers to narrate as having ended. They don't push us aside because our stories are insignificant. It is too significant. And so we enter this kind of pattern of erasure, curating revolutionaries, canonizing those who make them feel good, erasing people who make it complicated. So Nelson Mandela, remembered as a saint, Steve Biko. How many of you have actually heard of Steve Biko? Martin Luther King Jr. quoted endlessly about dreams and not about riots because MLK definitely said, remember the next time you protest, don't break down the window of that shop, you know? Malcolm X is a cautionary tale. Greta is a hero, and Chris Smalls is a headline for a week. People from the global south still in those Israeli prisons right now? Not even a footnote. This is not media bias. This is not just bias, it's narrative control. And it's how empire maintains itself long after colonizers themselves are gone. Because whiteness doesn't just rule through force, it rules through story. It rules through narrative. It decides whose pain is public and whose courage is incomprehensible. Oh, I know which Disney movie you're talking about. The Color of Friendship. Fuck that movie. Because whiteness and empire edits the archive of resistance, turning struggle into spectacle. Yes, they say. The West needs saviors. The West needs its saviors to be white, and it needs its martyrs to be brown, because that's what sustains the moral balance of the mythology of whiteness. Because if Greta is the conscience, who gets to be the corpse? So, what do we need to do? We need to move beyond palatable solidarity. This is not a condemnation of Greta at all. I fucking love her, and I will say it again and again and again. She is brilliant because she is doing the fucking work. When people say, "Oh, Greta, you started off as a climate protester, like why are you going on about Gaza?" Because she understands how colonialism and climate change are interlinked, and that is one of the things I absolutely fucking love about her. But this, my critique right here, this is a reckoning of why her voice can move mountains while others are silenced. It's about the structures that determine who is heard and who is disappeared into the system. As Say said, whose reaction is valid and whose is unjust, who gets to be put in prison and who gets to be put on the front page of a newspaper. And Fanon insisted that liberation is not achieved through the goodwill of the colonizer, but through the destruction of the colonial framework itself. To decolonize empathy is to refuse the hierarchy of empathy, to feel equally for those whose suffering implicates us all the fucking time. This means remembering every single activist on that flotilla, not as symbols, but as workers who are fighting a machine built on racial extraction. It means demanding freedom for Gaza. It means demanding freedom for South Africans held by Israel. It means demanding freedom for those people who are held hostage by the American and Israeli mines in the Congo. Not out of charity, but out of solidarity. True solidarity. It means seeing Palestinian life is not as tragedy, but testimony. Testimony, a living evidence of empire's ongoing crimes against humanity. And until the West can grieve the colonized without needing a white translator, it will never know justice. So now starts the work of remembering. Yeehaw! History will remember Greta. Greta Thunberg is one for the history books. Yeehaw! She'll be painted on murals, she already is, quoted in classrooms, canonized as a symbol of youthful courage. Perhaps, yeehaw, it's fair. She's earned her place there. But memory needs to make room for those who don't look like her. History needs to make room for people that have been actively erased from the narrative. How many of you know Robert Sobukwe? How many of you know that Winnie Madikizela Mandela, was more feared by the apartheid government than Nelson Mandela himself? Thank you. And so we look to people like Chris, who stared billionaires down and won out a union only to be written out of the narrative, because people know Chris Smalls as the person who sailed on it was the Handela flotilla. Do you know that he leveled a union against Amazon? So to say that the South Africans currently sitting in Israel right now, whose names are not being printed out in the New York Times, do not carry the spirit of every single anti-apartheid struggle is selective empathy. Yes, Nugget. Say, the journalists, the nurses, the nameless, who resist without cameras, without hashtags, without 24/7 surveillance on a tracking app online. $270 odd journalists have been killed in Gaza since the 7th of October, 2023. Tomorrow is 2 years since Israel began this. 67,000 people in Gaza have been killed. If compassion remains along color lines, then justice will always be a fiction. And the silence beneath the applause for people who are the faces of these movements will continue. I hear silence very, very loudly as this low persistent, and unforgiving reminder that the West only supports its own saviors. And the West loves its saviors to be white and its victims brown. If you do one thing tomorrow, I want you to restock on your coins, if you can, and go to every single Palestinian live there is. Every single one. Wa alaikum salam, Habibti. And drop everything you can to the Palestinians. Habibti, I'm about to end. Every single coin you have tomorrow. Not a single American, not me, nobody. Give everything that you can to the Palestinians tomorrow. Especially. It's going to be a painful day. If you pray, please make your du'as and light a candle. Light a candle for those who don't have any. It's 2 years. Safa, Haya, I'm going to drop you, okay? Assalamu alaikum, Habibti. It is a propaganda war. It really is a propaganda war. And thank you for everybody who's on Twitch and YouTube. I shall see you all tomorrow for the reading. I don't know how to stop streaming. There you go.